What if everything you've been taught about Jesus Christ has kept you from experiencing the very power he came to reveal? What if the miracles, the healings, the supernatural demonstrations you've read about in Scripture weren't meant to remain locked in the pages of history, but were actually a blueprint for your own life right now? For most of us, Jesus Christ exists somewhere between Sunday school stories and stained glass windows, a distant figure we admire, worship, and perhaps even pray to, but never truly understand in a way that transforms our daily reality. We've been taught to see him as the exception, the one-of-a-kind Son of God whose experiences were unique to him alone. But what if that's exactly backwards? What if Jesus was actually showing us what becomes possible when any human being fully awakens to their true spiritual identity? This isn't just theological speculation or religious philosophy. This is about a radical discovery that one man, Smith Wigglesworth, spent decades uncovering. A truth so powerful that it challenges everything organized religion has built its walls around. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might completely revolutionize not just how you think about Christ, but how you experience every single aspect of your existence. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most religious institutions won't tell you. The very doctrines and rituals that were supposed to bring you closer to God may have actually created an unbridgeable distance between you and the Christ presence that's been within you all along. Smith Wigglesworth recognized this profound tragedy. Millions of believers worshiping Christ from afar, never realizing that the same consciousness that animated Jesus of Nazareth is accessible to them right now, in this very moment. Think about it. Has this ever happened to you? You've prayed desperately for healing, for breakthrough, for transformation, and felt like your prayers were bouncing off the ceiling, unanswered. You've tried to be a better person, to follow religious rules, to earn God's favor somehow, and yet that deep, abiding peace and power you read about in Scripture still feels impossibly distant. What if I told you that the problem isn't your lack of worthiness or your insufficient faith, but rather a fundamental misunderstanding of who Christ actually is? Wigglesworth discovered something that religious tradition had buried beneath centuries of doctrine and institutional control. Christ isn't a person's last name. Christ isn't even exclusively about Jesus of Nazareth. Christ is a universal consciousness, a divine presence, a spiritual reality that transcends time, culture, and religious boundaries. And this consciousness isn't something you need to reach for or attain. It's something you need to recognize has been your true identity all along. What happens when this recognition truly dawns in your awareness changes everything. And I mean everything. When this recognition truly lands in your consciousness, something extraordinary begins to unfold. It's not a gradual improvement or a slow transformation. It's more like a light switch being flipped in a room that's been dark your entire life. Suddenly, healing stops being something you beg for and becomes something that flows naturally through your awareness. Abundance is no longer something you chase desperately, but something that emerges effortlessly when you align with this deeper truth. The problems that used to consume your thoughts and steal your peace begin dissolving before they can even take root in your mind. This is the hidden truth that changes the entire game. You see, most of us have been taught to look outside ourselves for help, to pray to a distant God, to plead for intervention, to hope that somehow, if we're good enough or faithful enough, we might receive what we need. But Wigglesworth's revelation turns this entire paradigm on its head. The Christ presence isn't somewhere out there. It's not floating in the clouds waiting to decide whether you're worthy of its attention. It's your true identity. It's who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and limitation. Now I want to go even deeper into what Wigglesworth actually discovered about Jesus himself, because this is where the transformation really begins to make sense. Jesus of Nazareth wasn't born with some special supernatural ability that made him fundamentally different from you and me. What made Jesus extraordinary was that he became so completely filled with Christ consciousness that his human personality, his ego, his personal will, his individual desires, dissolved into pure spiritual being. He became transparent. Think about that word for a moment. Transparent. Like a clear window that light passes through without obstruction. Jesus himself revealed this secret when he said, "I can of mine own self do nothing." This wasn't false humility or religious rhetoric. This was Jesus telling us directly. The human personality you see, the man called Jesus, isn't the source of this power. He was simply so aligned with Christ. Consciousness that it could flow through him without resistance, without interference, without the ego trying to claim credit or control the outcome. This is the revelation that shatters everything. The miracles weren't performed by a special person who had access to something you don't have. They were demonstrated by someone who recognized his complete oneness with the infinite source of all life, and then allowed that consciousness to express itself without hindrance. And here's what that means for your journey right now. The same transparency is available to you. The same consciousness that animated every word Jesus spoke, every healing he facilitated, every demonstration of divine power he revealed, exists within you at this very moment. If this is resonating with something deep inside you, write in the comments, "I'm ready to see this truth," because what comes next will show you exactly how this recognition begins to manifest in practical, tangible ways in your everyday life. Here's what most people miss when they read about Jesus healing the sick, raising the dead, or performing what we call miracles. They assume he possessed some unique supernatural power that he wielded over people and circumstances. But Wigglesworth discovered something radically different behind the scenes of those moments. Jesus wasn't injecting power into sick bodies or broken situations. He was recognizing the spiritual perfection that was already present in every single person who came to him. He was seeing past the human appearance, past the disease, past the limitation, and acknowledging the divine reality that had never actually been damaged or diminished. This shift in understanding changes everything about how transformation actually works. You see, we've been conditioned to believe that we need to develop spirituality, to earn God's favor, to somehow become good enough to deserve healing or breakthrough. We think it's about effort, discipline, religious performance, checking all the right boxes. But that entire mindset is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of who you already are. The Christ presence within you isn't something you cultivate through good behavior or spiritual practices. It's your true identity right now in this moment, regardless of what your circumstances look like, regardless of what mistakes you've made, regardless of how far you think you've fallen. This is the revolutionary truth that Wigglesworth spent his life revealing to anyone willing to listen. Christ is not Jesus's last name. It's not a title exclusive to one historical figure. Christ is a universal consciousness, a divine presence that's as available to you as the air you breathe. The difference between living in limitation and living in freedom isn't about becoming someone different. It's about recognizing who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning and fear. And here's where this becomes intensely practical in your daily journey. Every single time you make a decision to choose love instead of fear, you're allowing Christ consciousness to express through you. When you feel anxiety rising and you consciously shift toward peace, that's not just positive thinking or mental discipline, that's Christ consciousness flowing through your awareness. When you're facing apparent lack and you choose to recognize abundance as your true spiritual inheritance, you're aligning with the same universal presence that Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. If this content is speaking to your soul, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the deeper teachings we're exploring here. This is just the beginning of what's possible when you truly understand these principles. This isn't about transcending your humanity or becoming some otherworldly mystic who floats above normal life. It's about bringing this recognition into every conversation, every challenge, every moment of decision-making. The impact of this shift is profound because you stop being a victim of circumstances and start becoming a conscious expression of divine love in human form. You're not trying to manufacture spiritual experiences or force supernatural results. You're simply removing the barriers that have been blocking what's always been true about your essential nature. What becomes possible when you truly grasp this changes not just your internal experience, but everything you touch, everyone you encounter, every situation you walk into. If you're beginning to See how profoundly different this is from traditional religious teaching? Drop in the comments. This is awakening something in me. Because what we're about to explore next shows you exactly what happens when real people actually applied this recognition in impossible situations. Let me share something that will completely transform how you approach prayer. Most of us have been taught to pray like beggars at the gate of heaven, pleading, bargaining, hoping that if we say the right words or demonstrate enough faith, God might notice us and grant our requests. We've turned prayer into a desperate attempt to get divine attention, as if God were somehow distracted or distant, needing to be convinced to care about our struggles. But this entire approach reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of where the power actually resides. When you recognize that Christ consciousness lives as your true being, prayer becomes something entirely different. You're not reaching out to something external. You're not trying to bridge some vast distance between you and the divine. Prayer becomes recognition of what already exists, an awakening to the presence that has never been absent from your experience. It's like suddenly realizing that the treasure you've been searching for has been in your possession the entire time. The shift in your internal landscape when this clicks is extraordinary. You move from desperation to recognition, from pleading to acknowledgement, from hoping to knowing. This is where the journey gets really interesting because this recognition doesn't just change how you pray, it transforms your entire identity. You see, we've all been operating under a massive misconception about what we fundamentally are. We think of ourselves as human beings who occasionally have spiritual experiences, who sometimes feel connected to something greater, who on good days might sense divine presence. But Wigglesworth discovered that this gets the equation completely backwards. The truth that penetrates consciousness and changes everything is this. You're not a human being having spiritual experiences. You're a spiritual being appearing in human form. Your essential nature, your core identity, your true self, has always been and will always be divine consciousness temporarily expressed through a human body and personality. When this truth really lands, and I mean really penetrates beyond intellectual understanding into lived experience, every single challenge you face becomes something different. Problems stop being obstacles that threaten your well-being and become invitations to demonstrate the Christ presence within you. Think about the impact of this shift on your daily decisions. When financial pressure hits, instead of panicking about survival, you recognize that lack is a human appearance contradicting your spiritual reality of infinite abundance. When relationship conflict arises, rather than defending your wounded ego, you see an opportunity for divine love to express itself through authentic connection. When illness appears in your body, you don't deny the human experience, but you hold steadfast to the spiritual perfection that remains untouched by physical conditions. This isn't about denying reality or practicing positive thinking or pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. This is about understanding which reality is more fundamental, more true, more powerful. The human experience is real, but it's not ultimate. Beneath every appearance of limitation, there's a spiritual truth that's been present all along, waiting to be recognized and allowed to express itself. If this is beginning to shift how you see yourself and your challenges, write in the comments, "I'm seeing from a new perspective." Because what happens when you actually live from this recognition in impossible circumstances will show you just how practical and powerful this truth really is. Now, I want to show you how this actually played out in real life. Because Wigglesworth didn't just teach theory, he demonstrated these principles through thousands of documented healings that defied every natural explanation. We're talking about cancer disappearing, broken relationships being restored after years of silence, financial situations that seemed hopeless transforming into abundance. And here's the critical detail that separates this from religious superstition or wishful thinking. These transformations didn't happen through human effort, through positive affirmations, or through any technique you could package and sell. They happened through pure recognition of spiritual truth. The same power that raised Jesus from death. That's not metaphorical language or religious poetry. That exact same power is the animating force of your being right now, in this moment. It's what's keeping your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your consciousness aware. The question isn't whether you have access to divine power. The question is, whether you recognize it and allow it to express itself without your human interference getting in the way. Let me share a story that reveals just how profound this shift can be in someone's actual experience. There was a woman who came to one of Wigglesworth's gatherings carrying something heavy that no one could see. Decades of resentment toward her ex-husband. This wasn't casual annoyance or mild frustration. This was the kind of bitter anger that had poisoned every relationship in her life, that woke her up at 3 a.m. rehearsing old arguments, that made her physically ill with stress. She had tried everything the world offers for this kind of emotional wound. Therapy sessions that went nowhere. Forgiveness exercises that felt hollow and fake. Medication for the depression that came from carrying this burden for so long. Nothing touched it. Nothing even came close to providing relief. If something shifted inside you while watching this, show me by hitting that like button. It lets me know this resonates with you and helps others who need this message find it. Then she heard this truth about Christ consciousness, and something shifted at a level deeper than her mind could fully comprehend. She suddenly recognized that holding on to this anger meant denying the Christ presence in both herself and her former spouse. She wasn't trying to force herself to forgive. She wasn't practicing some technique or following therapeutic steps. She simply saw through the human appearance to the spiritual reality that had always been there beneath the hurt and betrayal. Within 3 weeks, just 21 days of living from this recognition, her ex-husband called unexpectedly. This was someone she hadn't spoken to in years, someone she had written off as incapable of change or genuine remorse. He apologized for years of painful behavior and asked for her forgiveness. But here's what stunned her most. She found herself responding from a place of genuine compassion she didn't even know she possessed. 15 years of bitterness, of resentment that had defined her identity and shaped every decision, dissolved in a single conversation. This wasn't about becoming a better person through willpower or following some roadmap to personal development. When she recognized Christ as her true identity, the love that had always been present beneath the human pain emerged naturally, effortlessly, powerfully. If you've been carrying something heavy that no human solution has been able to touch, drop in the comments. I'm ready for breakthrough. Because what becomes possible through this recognition extends far beyond emotional healing into every area of life where you've been stuck. The transformation through recognition extends into every corner of human experience, including areas where we think success depends purely on strategy and smart decisions. Consider a businessman who arrived at one of Wigglesworth's retreats absolutely desperate, attending as his absolute last resort before losing everything. 20 years of building his business, and now, bankruptcy was staring him down with cold certainty. He had exhausted every human solution, tried every strategy the business world offered, consulted experts, restructured, pivoted, and nothing worked. He was watching his life's work collapse in slow motion. But something profound happened when he heard this truth about Christ consciousness being his true identity. Instead of continuing to panic and scramble, he began recognizing infinite abundance as his spiritual birthright. Not something he had to create or attract, but something that was already present, waiting to be acknowledged. His entire approach to business transformed from that moment. He stopped desperately chasing new clients like a starving person grabbing at crumbs. He stopped trying to manipulate outcomes through sheer force of will. Instead, he began each day acknowledging the Christ presence within himself and within every person he would encounter. The shift wasn't in his business plan or his marketing strategy. The shift was in his consciousness. Within 2 months, 3 major contracts appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Companies that had never responded to his proposals suddenly wanted to work with him. His business didn't just survive, it thrived beyond anything he had experienced in 20 years. This wasn't luck or coincidence. This was what happens when consciousness shifts from limitation to recognition of what's always been spiritually true. Now let me share something even more powerful, because this recognition works even in situations where human beings feel most helpless and heartbroken. A mother watched her teenage son spiral into drug addiction, and it was destroying not just him but their entire family. She tried everything the world tells parents to do in this nightmare scenario. Professional counselors, rehabilitation programs, tough love approaches, everything. Not only did nothing work, but each intervention seemed to make things worse, pushing him further into darkness. Then she encountered Wigglesworth's teachings and realized she needed to shift something fundamental in how she was seeing her son. She had to stop seeing him as an addict, stop identifying him with the destructive behavior, and start recognizing the perfect Christ child that was his true spiritual identity. This wasn't about denying reality or enabling destructive choices. This was about holding steadfast to the truth that beneath every human appearance of brokenness was a perfect spiritual being temporarily lost in confusion. She stopped reacting to his behavior from fear and started responding from the Christ consciousness within herself. The transformation took 6 months, but it was profound and lasting. Her son began making different decisions, sought help on his own terms, reconnected with his family in genuine ways. Years later, he told her something remarkable. He said he could feel something different in how she looked at him during that time, something that helped him remember who he really was beneath the addiction. If this is speaking to a situation in your life where human solutions have reached their limit, write in the comments, "I'm holding on to this truth," because what you're about to discover next gives you practical ways to live from this recognition every single day. The question everyone asks at this point is obvious. How do I actually live from this recognition when the demands of daily life keep pulling me back into human limitations? Wigglesworth understood this challenge intimately, and he taught specific practices that move this truth from intellectual understanding into lived experience. These aren't complicated rituals or religious exercises that take hours of your day. They're simple recognitions that gradually rewire how you navigate every moment. The first practice Wigglesworth emphasized is what he called the listening ear, and it's radically different from how most people approach their spiritual life. Instead of constantly talking to God, making requests, listing needs, explaining problems, instead of all that noise, you simply become still and listen. You're not listening for audible voices or mystical experiences. You're creating space for divine guidance to arise naturally from within your own consciousness. This is where the real transformation in decision-making begins. Start with just 5 minutes of complete silence each morning before you engage with anything else. Don't bring your problems into this time. Don't ask for solutions. Don't try to figure anything out. Simply listen. At first, your mind will flood with thoughts, worries, mental chatter about everything you need to do. That's completely normal. But gradually, as you practice this consistently, you'll begin sensing a deeper presence beneath the surface noise. This is Christ consciousness. Communicating with your receptive awareness, and the guidance that emerges from this place is always loving, always constructive, always peaceful. The impact of this practice on your daily decisions is extraordinary. You stop agonizing over choices, stop relying solely on human logic that can only process limited information. Instead, you learn to consult the Christ wisdom within you that already knows the right path forward. The answers that come through this listening are often surprising, sometimes challenging your human preferences, but they always lead to outcomes that serve what's truly best for everyone involved. The second practice brings this recognition into every moment of your day, especially during those times when stress is rising and you can feel yourself slipping back into human reaction patterns. Throughout the day, particularly when challenges hit, you silently remind yourself of the truth. I am not a body. I am not a mind. I am not emotions. I am Christ. Consciousness appearing as individual being. Now, this isn't positive affirmation where you're trying to convince yourself of something you hope might be true. This is recognition of spiritual fact, acknowledgement of what's already real about your essential nature. When you're stuck in traffic and frustration starts building, that's your moment to practice this recognition. When financial pressure creates that familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach, that's when you acknowledge your true identity. When someone's difficult behavior triggers your reactive patterns, that's your invitation to see past the human appearance to the Christ presence that's their real nature. This practice gradually shifts your entire perspective from human reaction to spiritual response. You stop being controlled by circumstances and start demonstrating mastery over conditions through simple recognition of what you truly are. If this practice is calling to something deep within you, write in the comments, "I'm practicing this recognition." Because as powerful as these practices are, there's an even deeper dimension to how this recognition transforms not just your own experience, but everyone and everything you touch. There's a practice that Wigglesworth taught that might initially seem counterintuitive, but it reveals how healing actually works when you understand Christ consciousness. When someone asks you to pray for them, or when you witness suffering in another person, your natural human impulse is to try fixing the problem, to focus on the disease or the difficulty and mentally wrestle with it. But this approach actually reinforces the very limitation you're hoping to dissolve. Instead, Wigglesworth taught something radically different. You silently recognize the Christ perfection that's already present in that person. You don't analyze their symptoms or catalog their problems. You don't try to send them energy or manufacture healing through personal effort. You simply hold this recognition steadily, knowing with quiet certainty that spiritual truth is more powerful than any human appearance. And here's the crucial insight that transforms everything. The healing power isn't yours personally. You're not the source of anything. You become transparent to Christ consciousness, like a clear window that light passes through without obstruction. This is where the journey from practice to embodiment begins. In the beginning, recognizing Christ consciousness requires conscious effort. You have to remember to pause, to shift your perspective, to acknowledge spiritual truth when human appearances seem overwhelming. But something beautiful happens over time as you persist in this recognition. What started as deliberate practice gradually becomes your natural way of being. You don't have to remind yourself to see spiritually. It starts happening automatically. Spiritual recognition begins flowing through your awareness without conscious effort. Love emerges naturally in situations where you used to react with defensiveness or fear. Peace becomes your default state rather than something you have to achieve through meditation or techniques. You transform into what Wigglesworth called a transparency for Christ. Your personality doesn't disappear or become less authentically you. Instead, your unique individual expression becomes a clear window through which divine love, wisdom, and power express themselves naturally in the world. The impact of this transformation ripples out in ways you'll never fully track or measure. Store clerks sense something peaceful about your presence without knowing why. Business colleagues notice your calm competence under pressure and wonder what's different about you. Family members feel safer and more loved in your company. Strangers find themselves smiling after brief interactions with you, their day somehow lifted by an encounter they can't quite explain. This isn't about developing personal magnetism or learning communication techniques. This is what happens when Christ consciousness radiates naturally through your transformed awareness. You're not trying to influence anyone or demonstrate how spiritual you've become. You're simply being authentically yourself from the recognition of your true identity, and that authenticity blesses everyone it touches without any effort or intention on your part. This is how spiritual transformation actually spreads throughout the world, not through convincing people or preaching doctrines, but through individuals who have discovered their Christ nature and allow it to express itself naturally in ordinary daily living. You become part of the healing consciousness that quietly elevates human experience simply by being present. If you're sensing that this is your path, that you're being called to live from this recognition, write in the comments, "I am this transparency," because what happens as you look back on this entire journey reveals something profound about how every experience of your life has been preparing you for this exact moment of awakening. Looking back on your entire journey, you begin to see something remarkable. Every challenge you faced, every relationship that tested you, every moment of success and every experience of failure, none of it was random. All of it was divine curriculum, perfectly designed to prepare your consciousness for this exact recognition. What seemed like meaningless struggle was actually awakening you to your spiritual identity. The person you thought you were is dissolving into the Christ consciousness you've always been. Fear transforms into trust. Lack becomes abundance. Loneliness dissolves into love. Confusion gives way to divine guidance that flows naturally from within. You haven't become someone different. You've simply remembered who you always were beneath the human appearances. And this recognition brings profound gratitude for the entire journey, including the difficult parts that seemed pointless when you were living through them. Everything contributed to your awakening. Everything served your spiritual evolution. Everything was guided by the same Christ consciousness that's now expressing itself consciously through your transformed awareness. If you've made it this far with me, I know this message landed somewhere deep in your soul. This isn't content you stumbled upon by accident. This is exactly what you needed to hear right now. So if you found value in this journey we just took together, hit that subscribe button because there's so much more to explore on this path of awakening. The conversations we're having here go deeper than surface-level spirituality, and I want you with me for what's coming next. And here's what I'd love. Write in the comments. This message found me at the right time. Let me know this resonated with you, because your engagement helps this reach others who are ready for this truth. If this shifted something in your perspective, go ahead and hit that like button. It tells me you're connecting with this content, and it helps more people discover these teachings. And listen, there's another video right here that takes this understanding even further into practical application. Click and continue with me over there, because what you've started today is just the beginning of something profound.